At this time, it is a real pleasure for me to introduce our keynote speaker this evening. He's one of the greatest boxing ring announcers in the history of the sport, not just Florida, but the entire world. He's a very special individual. When I began my career as a ring announcer almost 30 years ago, I was trying to climb my way up the ladder. This gentleman took an interest in me. He offered me pointers, advice. He was a mentor. He even helped get me shows when he was double booked. He had no obligation to do that. He did it to pay it forward, and he's just a very class act. This gentleman, I'm so happy to see him here tonight. It's been several years, and this is probably the highlight of the whole weekend for me, personally. He is a member of the very first class of the Florida Boxing Hall of Fame, and deservedly so, back in 2009. Please welcome your hero and mine, the one and only Mr. Mark Berio.
Bobby. Yes, thank you.
Enjoy.
I wanted to trip when I came up, just if it may get a little sympathy. It's a real honor to be here. And Butch, when you started this thing, and I mean, 2009 was the inaugural class, I really respected what you were doing and what you have done. And the fact that we can all get here together and celebrate boxing and honor the champions is one of the most wonderful things I can ever say about the Florida Boxing Hall of Fame, that you started it all with a lot of people skeptical. And I want to thank you. He deserves the thanks. I wanted to kind of go down, for me, what an honor it has been in my lifetime to be a ring announcer. It's all I ever wanted to do. And my teachers can tell you that. I didn't want to do anything else. I was a straight A student. I made all A's. A F, a D, another F. My mother knew all my school teachers, and so did my dad, personally. But when I was 9 years old, I was very active in the boys' club, and my grandmother had a house right next to Cascaden Park. And I used to stay there all the time and walk to the Ybor City Boys Club, which wasn't even a block away. And one day, one afternoon, I walked in there, and they were having an amateur boxing show. And I was in the audience with the rest of the people, and Stretch Murphy, the boys club director for the entire Tampa Bay boys clubs, he was directed over to where I was sitting, and Stretch Murphy was like 7 feet tall to a 9-year-old boy. And he told me, "Mark, the director here told me that you might want to be the ring announcer for the event because we forgot to hire somebody." And I said, "How much?" And I said, no, I'll do it. I'll volunteer to do it. Little did I know, as a 9-year-old boy, that I would announce that card, amateur boxing card, and that it would lead me here as a keynote speaker at the Boxing Hall of Fame. I got to tell you, it's been a wonderful experience for me. I've been all over the world, very lucky. I remember getting on a plane, going to Atlantic City to do a fight there. And I look on the plane, and in the back, I see my 5th grade teacher. Her name was Rose Greco. She was tough. As a matter of fact, like most boys, I hated her. And I saw her, I hadn't seen her in 25 years. Even though she was a neighborhood teacher, she lived 4 blocks away from where I grew up in West Tampa. Anyway, I see her, I don't say anything. I was lucky to have a first-class seat, and the flight attendant came over and said, "Excuse me, sir, there's a lady back there that knows you. She'd like to talk to you." And I said, "Yeah, I know who she is." She says, "When the plane gets up in the air and we take off the seatbelts, you're welcome to walk back there and speak to her." I said, "Okay, I know where she is." So I get up when it's time. Forget about doing that today. Can't do that anymore. So I get up, I start walking down the center aisle, and she speaks up. She goes, "Mark," and I'm looking right at her, "don't you recognize who I am?" And as I'm walking toward her, I go, "Yes, ma'am, Mrs. Greco, I know who you are." She goes, "You're going to do a fight, huh, in Atlantic City?" I go, "Yes." All the customers, all the passengers are listening to this. And I go, "Yes, ma'am, in Atlantic City." She goes, "I know, because my husband is a big boxing fan. He sees you all the time." And I'm kind of, She says, "It's really nice to see you put that big mouth of yours to work." The whole plane loses it. When I go back to my seat, the woman brings me a glass of wine. She goes, "I think you need this." But that's been the experience that I've had. I did the Roberto Duran, Hector Macho Camacho fight at the Trump Taj Mahal when he had casinos. Anyway, it was a big night. And Joe DiMaggio was in attendance. And 2 of his big buddies come up to me and give me a card. And they say, "Excuse me, could you introduce Joe DiMaggio?" And I'm reading the card, and it was something he liked being introduced as the greatest living ball player of all time. And I told the guy, "Listen, I can't read that." "Why not?" I said, "Well, my own opinion is he's not the greatest living ball player, so I can't say something that I don't believe. With all due respect, he'll get a great introduction, and I know exactly what to say." He goes, "Yeah, but he likes that." I go, "Well, I can't do that. I'm sorry, but I will give him a good introduction." So anyway, I do give him one. And the whole place goes nuts. And later, he waves me over. And when I come up to him, he tells me, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from West Tampa." He goes, "I want to thank you. That was a very good introduction. I thought you knew me from New York." And I said, "No, but we have a lot of people in West Tampa that are like New York people." Anyway, it was an honor to meet him. But I got to tell you, we're here to induct Hall of Famers. And I want to mention the guy that gave me the biggest boost. I always did and still do amateur boxing shows, and I don't charge for my services because I believe that's the future of the sport, and I believe in it very strongly. So, when I can fit it in, I'll do an amateur show. And way back in Tampa, Floyd Self started boxing in Tampa. Prior to that time, there was no really one person that did that. You'd find amateur cards in Ybor City here and there, but Floyd was going to do boxing every other week. And I thought, that's unheard of. So his first card, believe it or not, was the same night that Ken Norton defended his heavyweight championship to Larry Holmes. And Larry Holmes beat him in a 15-round fight. And I couldn't go. And I told Mr. Self, I said, "I'd like to come." And he sent me in the mail 2 free tickets so me and my dad could go. And I told him I'd come the next card, and I did. And in the middle of the ring, doing the ring announcing, was Gail Sarens, his daughter. And she knew me from her work on Channel 8, and I was the announcer at Tampa Highlight. And so she told her dad, "Dad, you got to get this guy." And I told Gail, I said, "Gail, it's all right." She goes, "No, I don't want to do this." And I said, "But your dad needs you, and I'm glad to come in and do it any time you can." She says, "Well, in 2 weeks, I can't. And for every week after that, I can't." So I became his ring announcer. He was the first club sanctioned in Tampa Bay by the AAU, at that time, the governing body of boxing. There were only 3 registered clubs in the state: Jacksonville PAL, Orlando PAL, and the Southwest Boys Club in Orlando. There were only 34 boxers in the entire state, or at least in our association. There was really no organization. The president had left the state of Florida. He lived in Georgia. So I went with Floyd to a meeting of all these guys that had gyms: John LeBrun in Gainesville, Wes Young in Fort Myers. Steve is familiar with him, I'm sure. And all of these old timers. And to see all these people in this room trying to band together and become something, they did. I really can start crying thinking about it. We grew from 3 boxing clubs to 35 in our section of the state. Miami was much more developed. And in that time, we grew from 35 boxers to over 300 registered boxers in our part of the state. And the Golden Gloves was in Miami. Dick Lee used to be the manager, and a future inductee tomorrow, of course, Mark Streisand now had that inherited, did a hell of a job with it. Golden Gloves was the centerpiece for all activities in boxing. Anyway, Floyd Self convinced Dick Lee to have district championships with the promise that the winners would get their way funded to the state finals in Miami. And the losers could still go and compete. And Dick Lee said yes. And when, Orlando had a tournament, Jacksonville had one, and we in Tampa had one. When we were done, Dick Lee said, I'm moving the Golden Gloves to Tampa. And in 1981, we had one of the greatest tournaments in Tampa. A lot of great champions. And on the night of our finals, Phil Alessi announced that he was going to start professional boxing again in Tampa. And he had monthly cards, and they were great. He was a great supporter of things that were going on at the gym in Ybor City. So, I have to tell you, I honor the Hall of Fame for at least inducting Floyd. He died a couple of years ago. And I used to go out and eat with him. He deserves it. I can tell you that. That man put a lot of money and a lot of effort, got a lot of great people to volunteer. One of my fellow inductees in 2009 is Brian Gary. Brian Gary, who I personally don't like, just kidding, of course. Brian Gary, he was talked into refereeing by Michael Boggs, who started doing amateur boxing and became later a treasurer for the amateur boxing. I became the chairman for 3 years, so I enjoyed it. And I think of Michael Boggs, of course I think of Brian, and another inductee tomorrow, Phyllis Gary. When I used to announce her as a timekeeper, I would always say, the very prompt Phyllis Gary. And she was. She became a very good timekeeper and a very honest one. I'll tell you, it's not easy to get in there and box. But it's not easy for a lot of the people who love it to spend the time that they do in it to make it great for everybody. And I commend all of them. I went blind. It's been about 7 years ago. I lost my eyesight to diabetes. And I kept announcing, for some reason, I had a good memory. So even though I would write on my cards the introductions, I memorized them. And I could see them when they told me to start announcing. And I did that for 2 years, blind. And the USA Network and all the other networks knew it. And they kept me on. But you know, I got into announcing because it appealed to me. It's something like, it's better than lifting heavy boxes for a living. I loved it. And I met a lot of great people. But then when I got blind, I remember I had to count the number of steps that I had to climb into the ring because I couldn't see the steps. One time, I was doing a show at Madison Square Garden, and I tripped. And luckily, I'm a pretty good prankster, and my wrestling ability, I guess, being able to be coordinated, I fell through the ropes. And everybody cracked up. And I got up like a wrestler, and I started kicking the ropes like it was the ropes' fault. And I had a friend of mine that grew up with me that was at that fight. And the whole place cracked up, and he said, you know, I knew you were going to pull some kind of BS when you got in the ring. So I always had a fun time. I loved the people I worked with, and I respected them. And I got to tell you, God bless Floyd Self. He really was an inspiration and an organizer. And by the way, he was a member of the Governor's Council on Physical Fitness and Sports. He was the boxing guru of the Sunshine State Games. Boy, that was something else. So I'll leave you with this. I'm sorry to have gotten emotional, but the truth is, I'm not sorry at the same time. Because boxing is an emotional sport, very emotional. And the people that are in it come and go, but for the most part, they are unforgettable. And I'm just glad that I'm still able to do it, even though my voice isn't that strong today. My teachers would be very happy about that, by the way. I'll leave you with this story about Jake LaMotta. I've told it before on the radio. And Jake LaMotta, we met in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I told Jake, we were eating at a banquet like this, and I told him, Jake, you ever been here before? He said, yeah, I spent a whole week one night here. That's Jake. So he tells me the story of his father when he became a United States citizen from Italy, and he studied. He said, you know, my old man, he went down to the New York State office to be sworn in as a citizen, and they asked him 3 questions. Who was the first president of the United States? He said, Georgia Washington. He said, that's right. He says, who wrote the Declaration of Independence? Thomas Jefferson. That's correct. He goes, who shot Abraham Lincoln? He says, I don't know, I didn't see anything, I don't know who you're talking about. Perfect. And I just told him, I go, you know, when I was going to school, the guys I went to school with, you didn't play around with them. They would put you 6 feet under. And I was lucky. I was a sports kid, even though I looked like a nerd with my glasses. But they all took care of me, every one of them. And they saw me. I remember I went to a 7-Eleven, and I had a guy who just came out of prison. And he says, hey, Mark, how you doing? He hugged me. I'm in the 7-Eleven. They're all looking, who are these two guys? And he goes, you know, when I was in the clink, we'd have the fights on TV there. And I told everybody, hey, I know that guy. I grew up with him in West Tampa. And he says, nobody believed me. And I said, you're in the prison, man. Well, why would they believe you? But the truth is, the real stars of the show, Bob knows this, and I told him this, real stars of the show are not the ring announcers. That's why I never came up with a catchphrase like, let's get ready to rumble, which, by the way, I replaced Michael Buffer in Atlantic City. And he was doing real good. He was trying his catchphrase, which was, man your battle stations. And I said, what the hell is that? What is he doing that for? Stupid me. He came up with, let's get ready to rumble. And it's made him a lot of money, and it made me a lot of money, because all of us made a lot of money in this business because of Michael Buffer. Jimmy Lennon, his father, the great Jimmy Lennon. I was just telling this to Bob. He was the first ring announcer to wear a tuxedo. And now his son, Jimmy Lennon Jr., a class guy, really wonderful guy. I've gotten to work with those guys a lot. So I'll leave you with this. God bless all of you for supporting the Florida Boxing Hall of Fame. Something you won't ever be sorry about. And I love you all for doing it. And I thank you very much. Oh, one more thing, I'm just kidding.
Mark, this a quick story for you to dedicate to you. My first fight in Atlantic City was a heavyweight title fight in Boardwalk Hall. It was the biggest crowd I'd ever been in front against, probably 20,000 people, worldwide pay-per-view heavyweight title fight. Fight goes 12 rounds. I climb into the ring. I'm waiting for the decision card. and I see someone in about the fourth row doing this, pointing at me. Is he pointing at me? I did me. He's like, what do you want? And he points at his neck like this. And then I realize he's telling me something. When I climbed into the ring, I bumped into somebody who was already in the ring, and my tie went crooked. I straightened it up, did this. He goes, it was comedian Joe Piscopo. That's for you. Thank you, my friend. So glad to have you.